My son put me in a nursing home, but the building he worked in was secretly mine. The day my son placed me in a nursing home was the day he believed my life was over. I remember the exact moment. The sky outside the car window was gray, heavy with rain, and the streets of Chicago looked blurred behind the glass. My son Daniel kept both hands tightly on the steering wheel, avoiding eye contact with me. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, holding my purse on my lap like it was the last piece of my old life. "Mom," he finally said, clearing his throat, "this place is really nice. They have nurses 24 hours a day, activities, gardens. You'll like it here." I looked at him, my only son, the boy I had raised alone after his father died, the boy whose school tuition I paid by working double shifts, the boy whose college degree I financed by selling my jewelry. And now he was explaining why I needed to be placed somewhere, out of the way. "I see," I said calmly. Daniel sighed, relieved that I wasn't arguing. "You're 76, Mom. You shouldn't live alone anymore. It's safer this way." Safer. That word sounded almost funny. For 76 years, I had taken care of myself and everyone around me. I had run businesses, negotiated contracts, survived economic crashes, and managed more employees than Daniel had ever met in his life. But according to him, I suddenly couldn't take care of myself. The car turned into the driveway of Green Meadows Nursing Residence, a large beige building surrounded by trimmed hedges and flower beds. It looked clean, quiet, and painfully final. Daniel parked the car and turned toward me with a forced smile. "Come on, Mom, let's get you settled." Get me settled, as if I were luggage. I stepped out of the car slowly. The cold wind touched my face as I looked at the building in front of me. Residents sat on benches near the entrance, wrapped in blankets, staring silently at nothing in particular. Some looked lonely. Some looked defeated. Some looked like they had simply been forgotten. Daniel grabbed my suitcase from the trunk. "That's all you brought?" "I don't need much." That part was true. I had already moved everything important from my house months ago, everything except a few clothes and personal items, because deep down, I had already suspected this day was coming. Inside, the reception smelled faintly of disinfectant and old furniture. A cheerful young nurse approached us. "Welcome to Green Meadows. You must be Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker." "That's me." Daniel filled out the paperwork while the nurse showed me around. "This is the dining hall," she said. "A large room with round tables and elderly residents eating quietly. And over here we have the recreation room. Bingo nights are very popular." I nodded politely, but my mind wasn't really there, because as I walked through those halls, I remembered something else entirely. The day Daniel got his first job. He had been 23 and incredibly proud. "Mom, you won't believe it. I got hired at Hawthorne Corporate Tower. It's the biggest office building downtown." I smiled warmly. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart." What Daniel never knew was that Hawthorne Corporate Tower had been mine for years. Not under my name, of course, but through a private investment company I quietly built decades earlier. The building where my son worked every day, the elevators he rode, the office he sat in, the conference rooms where he bragged to his colleagues, all of it belonged to me, and he had absolutely no idea. "Mrs. Whitaker?" the nurse said gently, bringing me back to the present. "Yes? This will be your room." A small but comfortable room. A bed, a chair, a window overlooking the garden. Daniel walked in behind us, glancing around. "See, Mom? It's nice." I sat on the edge of the bed. "Yes," I said softly. "It's nice." Daniel looked at his watch. "I actually have to get back to work. Big presentation today." Of course he did. His job was important. After all, he worked in one of the most prestigious buildings in the city. My office is on the 23rd floor now, he added proudly. Promotion last month. That's wonderful, I said. He hesitated for a moment, then awkwardly patted my shoulder. I'll visit soon. Soon. That word has a strange meaning when children say it to their parents. Sometimes it means next week. Sometimes it means never. Daniel picked up his car keys and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back. Take care of yourself, Mom. The door closed, and just like that, I was alone. The silence in the room was almost loud. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, residents were feeding birds in the garden. Some nurses chatted quietly nearby. Life continued here, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. But inside my purse, my phone buzzed. I took it out and looked at the screen. A message from Mr. Harrison, the CEO of Whitaker Holdings, my investment company, the company that owned Hawthorne Corporate Tower. The message read, Mrs. Whitaker, the board meeting is tomorrow. The acquisition of 2 new buildings is ready for your approval. I smiled slightly. My son believed he had placed his fragile old mother in a nursing home. What he didn't know was that the quiet woman in this small room still controlled millions of dollars in real estate, and the building where his son worked every single day was only one piece of my empire. I typed a short reply. Prepare the documents. I'll review them tonight. Then I looked once more at the door Daniel had just walked through and whispered quietly to myself, One day, my son, you're going to discover the truth. The first night at the nursing home was strangely peaceful, not because the place was comfortable, not because I belonged there, but because for the first time in many years I had absolutely nothing to prove to anyone. The hallway outside my room was quiet. Occasionally, a nurse's footsteps echoed softly across the polished floor. I sat in the chair beside the window, my phone resting in my hand. Outside, the garden lights glowed gently in the dark. To anyone watching, I probably looked like just another elderly woman waiting for sleep to come. But inside my purse, my phone buzzed again. I took it out and looked at the screen. A message from Mr. Harrison, the CEO of Whitaker Holdings, my investment company, the company that owned Hawthorne Corporate Tower. The message read, Mrs. Whitaker, the board meeting is tomorrow. The acquisition of 2 new buildings is ready for your approval. I smiled slightly. My son believed he had placed his fragile old mother in a nursing home. What he didn't know was that the quiet woman in this small room still controlled millions of dollars in real estate, and the building where his son worked every single day was only one piece of my empire. I typed a short reply. Prepare the documents. I'll review them tonight. Then I looked once more at the door Daniel had just walked through and whispered quietly to myself, One day, my son, you're going to discover the truth. The first night at the nursing home was strangely peaceful, not because the place was comfortable, not because I belonged there, but because for the first time in many years I had absolutely nothing to prove to anyone. The hallway outside my room was quiet. Occasionally, a nurse's footsteps echoed softly across the polished floor. I sat in the chair beside the window, my phone resting in my hand. Outside, the garden lights glowed gently in the dark. To anyone watching, I probably looked like just another elderly woman waiting for sleep to come. But inside my purse, my phone buzzed again. I took it out and looked at the screen. A message from Mr. Harrison, the CEO of Whitaker Holdings, my investment company, the company that owned Hawthorne Corporate Tower. The message read, Mrs. Whitaker, the board meeting is tomorrow. The acquisition of 2 new buildings is ready for your approval. I smiled slightly. My son believed he had placed his fragile old mother in a nursing home. What he didn't know was that the quiet woman in this small room still controlled millions of dollars in real estate, and the building where his son worked every single day was only one piece of my empire. I typed a short reply. Prepare the documents. I'll review them tonight. Then I looked once more at the door Daniel had just walked through and whispered quietly to myself, "One day, my son, you're going to discover the truth." The first night at the nursing home was strangely peaceful, not because the place was comfortable, not because I belonged there, but because for the first time in many years I had absolutely nothing to prove to anyone. The hallway outside my room was quiet. Occasionally, a nurse's footsteps echoed softly across the polished floor. I sat in the chair beside the window, my phone resting in my hand. Outside, the garden lights glowed gently in the dark. To anyone watching, I probably looked like just another elderly woman waiting for sleep to come. But inside my purse, my phone. The following week moved quickly. At Brightwell Consulting, Daniel was having the best week of his career. The expansion request had been approved faster than anyone expected. 3 entire floors inside Hawthorne Corporate Tower. For the company, it meant growth. For Daniel, it meant opportunity. And he was determined to prove he deserved it. Monday morning, Daniel walked into the sleek glass building with his usual confidence. The lobby buzzed with employees rushing to elevators, security guards greeting tenants, and the quiet hum of corporate life. He loved this place. To him, Hawthorne Corporate Tower represented success, power, status, everything he had worked for. Jason caught up with him near the elevators. "Big news," Jason said excitedly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" "The expansion got approved." Daniel smiled. "I heard." "No, you don't understand," Jason continued. "Management wants you to lead the transition project." Daniel froze. "Lead it?" Jason nodded. "You'll be coordinating everything with the building management and the owner's representatives." For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. This was exactly the kind of opportunity that could push him up the corporate ladder. "When's the meeting?" he asked. Jason checked his phone. "Next Thursday, big tenant review meeting. The building owner might even attend." Daniel laughed lightly. "Doubt it. Owners of buildings like this don't show up for meetings." Jason shrugged. "Still, imagine that." Daniel walked toward his office feeling proud. Everything in his life seemed perfectly under control. His career was rising, his home was peaceful, and his mother, well, she was safe in a nursing home where professionals could take care of her. He had done the responsible thing. At least, that's what he told himself. Across the city, my week was also moving quickly, but in a very different way. At Green Meadows, the staff had already gotten used to seeing me walk through the halls with my phone pressed to my ear. Most residents spent their mornings playing cards or watching television. I spent mine reviewing investment portfolios. Walter noticed it again during breakfast. "You're working," he said. "I always work." He smiled. "I knew it." I sipped my coffee calmly. Old habits. Walter leaned closer. "So, what did you do before retirement?" I looked at him thoughtfully. "Real estate." "Small business?" I smiled slightly. "Something like that." At that moment, my phone rang. It was Harrison again. I answered immediately. "Good morning." "Mrs. Whitaker," he said. "The expansion meeting is confirmed for Thursday at Hawthorne Tower." "Excellent. Brightwell Consulting will send their project manager." "I know." "And will you be attending in person?" I looked out the window of my small nursing home room. Residents were walking slowly through the garden, nurses chatting quietly, a peaceful, almost forgotten place. "Yes," I said. "I'll be there." Harrison paused. "This will be the first time the tenants meet the building owner." "That's fine. I should warn you, some of them may be surprised." I chuckled softly. That's exactly the point. Thursday arrived sooner than anyone expected. At Hawthorne Corporate Tower, the conference room on the 30th floor had been prepared for the tenant review meeting. Large glass windows overlooked the entire city. A long, polished table filled the center of the room. Executives from several companies sat quietly reviewing documents. Daniel adjusted his tie nervously. Jason whispered beside him, "You okay?" "Yeah." "You look tense." Daniel exhaled slowly. "This meeting is important." Jason grinned. "You're presenting the expansion plan. Relax." Daniel nodded, but something still felt unusual. The building management team seemed unusually formal today. More security, more assistance, more preparation. Finally, one of the managers stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming." The room quieted. "Before we begin, we'd like to introduce the owner of Hawthorne Corporate Tower." Daniel leaned back in his chair with mild curiosity. He had always wondered who owned this massive building. Some billionaire, some investment group, someone powerful. The door opened, and a woman slowly walked into the room. Daniel wasn't really paying attention at first until he heard a familiar voice. "Good afternoon, everyone." His head snapped up, and his entire world stopped. Because standing at the front of the room, calm, confident, dressed elegantly in a dark blue suit, was his mother, Eleanor Whitaker, the same woman he had left in a nursing home just days earlier. Daniel stared at her like he had seen a ghost. Jason whispered beside him, "Dude, do you know her?" Daniel couldn't answer because his brain was still trying to process what he was seeing. His mother walked to the head of the table and placed a folder down calmly. The room waited respectfully. Then Harrison spoke. "Everyone, this is Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker, founder of Whitaker Holdings and owner of Hawthorne Corporate Tower." The words echoed in Daniel's mind. Owner, founder, Whitaker Holdings. Suddenly, everything began connecting. The building, the meetings, the approvals, the expansion request, all of it. His mother looked around the table. Then her eyes gently landed on Daniel. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel's face had turned pale. Shock, confusion, embarrassment. Every emotion collided at once. Finally, she spoke calmly. "Mr. Whitaker," she said politely, "would you like to begin your presentation?" The room turned toward Daniel, everyone waiting, everyone watching, but Daniel could barely breathe. Because the powerful business owner sitting at the head of the table, the woman controlling the building where his entire career existed, was the same mother he believed was quietly living her final years in a nursing home. And at that moment, he realized something terrifying. He had never truly known his mother at all. For several seconds, Daniel couldn't move. The conference room felt suddenly too small, too quiet. Everyone's attention was now on him. His laptop sat open in front of him, the presentation ready to begin. But his mind was frozen. Because the woman sitting at the head of the table, the owner of the building, the person every executive in the room was treating with deep respect, was his mother. Jason leaned closer and whispered, "Daniel, what's going on?" Daniel swallowed hard. "That's my mother." "Your what?" Before Jason could ask anything else, Eleanor spoke again calmly. "Mr. Whitaker," she repeated politely, "your presentation." Her voice was professional, calm, as if they were complete strangers. Daniel slowly stood up. His legs felt weak. He walked to the large screen at the front of the room, trying to focus on the slides. Good afternoon," he began. His voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be presenting Brightwell Consulting's expansion proposal for 3 additional floors within Hawthorne Corporate Tower." He clicked to the first slide. Numbers, charts, growth projections. Normally, Daniel would deliver a presentation like this flawlessly, but today was different because every time he looked toward the table, he saw his mother sitting there, calmly watching him, not angry, not emotional, just observing, the way powerful business leaders observe a presentation. It made Daniel even more nervous. He continued speaking. Our company has experienced significant growth over the past 2 years. The additional office space will allow us to expand our workforce and improve operational efficiency. One of the executives nodded. Another took notes. But Eleanor simply listened quietly, her hands folded neatly on the table. Daniel finished the financial section and moved to the final slide. In conclusion, the expansion will strengthen our company's position while also increasing long-term revenue for the building. He turned toward the table. Thank you. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Harrison spoke. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. Very thorough. A few executives nodded approvingly. Daniel slowly sat back down. His heart was still racing. Eleanor opened the folder in front of her and reviewed the documents briefly. Then she looked up. Impressive work, she said calmly. Daniel didn't know how to respond, because hearing those words from his mother in this environment felt strange, almost unreal. One of the board members added, "The proposal is financially strong. I recommend approval." Another executive agreed. Harrison turned toward Eleanor. "Mrs. Whitaker, the final decision is yours." Daniel's chest tightened. The entire future of his company's expansion, his promotion opportunity, everything. Daniel didn't sleep much that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image again and again. His mother, sitting at the head of the conference table, executives listening carefully to every word she said. The owner of Hawthorne Corporate Tower, the founder of Whitaker Holdings, the woman everyone respected, and the same woman he had dropped off at a nursing home like she was fragile and helpless. The thought twisted painfully in his chest. By morning, Daniel knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. He needed answers. That afternoon, he drove back to Green Meadows nursing residence, the same quiet building he had visited just a week earlier. But this time, it felt very different. When he parked the car, he sat there for a moment, staring at the entrance. Last time he had come here feeling responsible, confident that he was making the right decision for his mother. Now he felt something else entirely: shame. He stepped out of the car and walked inside. The receptionist recognized him immediately. "Oh, hello. You're Mrs. Whitaker's son, right?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." "She's in the garden." Daniel thanked her and walked outside. The garden looked peaceful in the afternoon sunlight. A few residents sat on benches while nurses moved quietly between them. And there, near the fountain, Daniel saw her. His mother sat at a small table with another elderly man. They were drinking tea and talking calmly. For a moment, Daniel just stood there watching. She looked comfortable, relaxed. Nothing like the helpless image he had imagined when he placed her here. The man across from her noticed Daniel first. "Looks like you have company," he said. Eleanor turned her head. When she saw Daniel, her expression didn't change much, just a small nod. "Hello, Daniel." The calmness in her voice made him feel even more nervous. "Hi, Mom." The elderly man stood politely. "Well, I'll leave you two to talk," he said. Eleanor smiled at him. "Thank you, Walter." Walter walked away slowly, glancing curiously at Daniel as he left. Daniel sat down across from his mother. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Why didn't you tell me?" Eleanor stirred her tea calmly. "Tell you what?" "That you owned Hawthorne Tower." She looked at him. "You never asked?" Daniel sighed. "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Daniel rubbed his face. I thought you were retired." "I am retired." "But you're still running a huge company." "I review investments," she said calmly. "That doesn't require an office." Daniel looked around the garden. This place, it's not where someone like you should be. Eleanor raised an eyebrow slightly. Someone like me? You know what I mean. No, she replied. Explain it to me. Daniel hesitated, because the truth sounded terrible when spoken out loud. He said quietly, I thought you needed help. I thought living alone wasn't safe anymore. Eleanor watched him carefully. And the nursing home was the solution? Daniel nodded weakly. I just wanted you to be taken care of. Eleanor leaned back slightly in her chair. Daniel, do you remember when you were 10 years old? He looked confused. What? You broke your arm riding your bicycle. He blinked. Yeah, I remember. You were terrified to go to the hospital. Daniel slowly nodded. You held my hand the entire time, even while the doctor set the bone. Daniel smiled faintly at the memory. You told me everything would be fine. And it was. Eleanor looked at him quietly. I spent my entire life making sure you were safe. Daniel looked down at the table. I know. Do you? The question hung in the air. Because last week, she continued gently, my son decided I couldn't take care of myself anymore. Daniel felt the weight of those words. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I know. But you did. Her voice wasn't angry. That somehow made it worse. Daniel looked up again. Why didn't you say anything? When? When I brought you here. Eleanor smiled slightly. Would it have changed your mind? Daniel opened his mouth, then stopped. He wasn't sure. Maybe it would have. Maybe it wouldn't. And that uncertainty made him feel even worse. Eleanor stood up slowly. Walk with me. They began walking along the garden path. Daniel glanced at the building behind them. Are you staying here? For now. But you could live anywhere. Yes. Daniel frowned. Then why stay? Eleanor stopped walking and looked at him. Because sometimes, Daniel, people need time to think. Think about what? She studied his face carefully. About who they raised. Daniel felt those words like a quiet punch to the chest. Because for the first time, he realized something deeply uncomfortable. The woman he believed needed his help was actually deciding whether he still deserved hers. The garden grew quieter as the afternoon sun slowly moved behind the trees. Daniel and Eleanor walked along the stone path in silence for a few minutes. Daniel kept replaying her words in his mind. Sometimes people need time to think about who they raised. It hurts more than anger would have. Finally, Daniel spoke again. Mom, I really didn't know about any of this. Eleanor looked at him calmly. That much is clear. They reached a wooden bench near the edge of the garden. She sat down slowly. Daniel remained standing for a moment before sitting beside her. For the first time since the meeting at Hawthorne Tower, Daniel truly looked at his mother, not as the quiet, elderly woman he believed she had become, but as the woman sitting confidently in a boardroom surrounded by executives. Can I ask you something? You just did. He managed a small smile. How did you build all of this? Eleanor looked toward the trees for a moment, as if the answer lived somewhere in the past. It started a very long time ago. When your father died, you were 8 years old. Daniel's expression softened. His father had died suddenly from a heart attack. Most of Daniel's memories of that time were blurry. What I remember, Eleanor continued quietly, is a mountain of bills and a house that was almost taken away from us. Daniel stared at her. You never told me that. You were a child. You didn't need to know. She folded her hands in her lap. I worked 3 jobs during those years. Daniel frowned. I remember you working at the bookstore. Yes, during the day, and at the diner in the evenings. But what you didn't see was the 3rd job. What was that? I studied. Daniel blinked. Studied what? Business, finance, real estate. He looked surprised. You were going to college? At night. Daniel tried to picture it, his mother finishing long shifts at the diner, then sitting in classrooms late into the night. I never knew. You were asleep most nights by the time I got home. She smiled faintly.
But eventually, those classes paid off. How? The bookstore owner needed help managing some rental properties he owned. Daniel nodded slowly. So you helped him? I did more than help him, she said calmly. I doubled his profits within 2 years. Daniel stared at her. You were running his real estate business? Eventually. She continued speaking as if describing ordinary events. After that, I began investing in small properties myself. With what money? Daniel gave her a knowing look. Every extra dollar I earned. She paused briefly. Sometimes I skipped meals to save money. Daniel felt a sharp knot form in his chest. Mom. But she continued. 1 small apartment building became 2. 2 became 5. And 5 eventually became something much larger. Daniel slowly began to understand. Whitaker Holdings. Yes. But Hawthorne Tower, that's huge. Eleanor nodded. That purchase almost didn't happen. Why? Because the bank believed it was too risky. Daniel leaned forward. So how did you convince them? Eleanor smiled slightly. I didn't. You didn't? No. She looked at him calmly. I bought it anyway. Daniel blinked. You bought a skyscraper without the bank approving the loan? I found other investors. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. How old were you? 53. And you never told me any of this? Eleanor looked at him carefully. You were building your own life. I didn't want you thinking you had to follow my path. Daniel leaned back on the bench, overwhelmed. All these years, he had believed his mother lived a quiet, modest life. Meanwhile, she had built an empire. Why keep it secret? It wasn't a secret. Then why didn't you ever talk about it? Eleanor's expression softened slightly. Because I was more interested in hearing about your life. Daniel looked down at the table. All the conversations he remembered suddenly felt different. She had always asked about his work, his friends, his goals, but he rarely asked the same questions back. He had assumed he already knew everything about her, and that assumption now felt painfully foolish. Mom, he said quietly, I'm sorry. Eleanor didn't respond immediately. Instead, she watched the residents walking slowly through the garden. Finally, she said something simple. Daniel, life has a strange way of teaching us humility. He nodded. I guess I'm learning that now. She stood up again, slowly. The important question.
The weeks after that conversation changed everything. Not suddenly, not magically, but slowly, in ways Daniel never expected. At Brightwell Consulting, the story about the owner of Hawthorne Corporate Tower spread quickly. People talked about the mysterious founder of Whitaker Holdings, who had appeared at the tenant meeting. And even more surprising, the fact that the young project manager leading the expansion was her son. Some coworkers treated Daniel with curiosity, others with quiet respect. But Daniel didn't feel proud about the connection. Instead, every time someone mentioned his mother, he remembered the garden bench at the nursing home and the quiet disappointment in her voice. Meanwhile, Daniel began visiting Green Meadows nursing residents every few days. At first, the visits were awkward. They drank tea in the garden, talked about small things, weather, work, the residents. But slowly, the conversations changed. Daniel started asking questions he had never asked before. Mom, what was the first building you ever bought? A tiny duplex near the river, she answered one afternoon. Did you ever feel afraid you might fail? Every single day. Another day, he asked, what was the hardest moment in your career? Eleanor smiled slightly. Convincing investors that a single mother could run a company? Daniel shook his head. They were wrong. Yes, she said calmly, they were. Each conversation revealed another piece of a life Daniel had never fully seen, a life filled with struggle, risk, determination, and quiet strength. 3 months later, the expansion project at Hawthorne Tower was finally complete. Brightwell Consulting now occupied 3 additional floors. The company celebrated with a formal event in the building's grand lobby. Executives, employees, and investors gathered for the occasion. Daniel stood near the back of the room, adjusting his tie nervously. Jason walked over. "You did it. The whole project turned out perfect." Daniel smiled faintly. "It was a team effort." Jason looked around the room. "You know the owner is coming tonight, right?" Daniel nodded. "I know." The doors opened a few minutes later, and Eleanor Whitaker walked into the lobby. But this time, Daniel noticed something different. She wasn't alone. Several residents from Green Meadows had come with her. Walter walked beside her proudly, looking around the luxurious building with amazement. Daniel walked forward to greet them. "Mom?" "Hello, Daniel." Walter laughed warmly. "You didn't tell me your son worked in a palace." Daniel smiled politely. "It's not mine." Eleanor looked around the lobby slowly. For a moment, she seemed thoughtful. Then she turned to the crowd and stepped toward the small stage set up near the center of the room. Harrison approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate the successful expansion of Brightwell Consulting here at Hawthorne Corporate Tower." Polite applause filled the lobby. "And now," Harrison continued, "I'd like to invite the owner of this building, Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker, to say a few words." The crowd applauded again as Eleanor stepped forward. She stood at the microphone calmly. "For many years," she began, "this building has represented opportunity." She paused briefly. "Opportunity for businesses to grow, opportunity for people to build careers." Her eyes moved across the room until they rested on Daniel. But the most important opportunities in life are not always about buildings or investments. The room grew quiet. They are about people. She looked toward the group from Green Meadows standing nearby. "Several months ago, I moved into a nursing home." A few people in the audience looked surprised. "At first, I believed it was a mistake." She smiled slightly. "But sometimes life places us exactly where we need to be." Daniel listened carefully, unsure where she was going. "During my time there, I met people with incredible stories. Former teachers, doctors, veterans, artists, people who built lives full of meaning." Her voice softened. "And yet, many of them feel forgotten." The room remained silent. "So tonight," Eleanor continued, "I'd like to announce something new." Harrison looked curious. Eleanor continued, "Whitaker Holdings will be converting the top 5 floors of this building into a foundation center." Whispers spread through the crowd. "A place dedicated to supporting programs for senior citizens who have spent their lives contributing to society." More murmurs filled the room. "But this center will not simply provide care. It will provide opportunity, workspaces for retired professionals, mentorship programs, community initiatives." Her eyes moved again toward Daniel. "Because experience should never be discarded. It should be valued." The room erupted in applause. Daniel felt something tighten in his throat because he understood what she was really saying. Later that evening, as the guests began to leave, Daniel found his mother standing near the lobby windows. The city lights stretched endlessly outside. "That was incredible," he said quietly. Eleanor looked at him. "I thought it was time for the building to serve a greater purpose." Daniel nodded slowly. "You always think bigger than everyone else." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes." There was a moment of silence. Then Daniel spoke again. "Mom, I've been thinking about something." "Yes?" "If you ever decide to leave Green Meadows," she raised an eyebrow, "you could live with me." Eleanor studied him for a moment. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He smiled gently. "I think I still have a lot to learn from you." Eleanor looked out at the city one more time. Then she placed her hand on his arm. "Daniel, I believe you already started learning." He nodded, and for the first time in many years, mother and son stood together not as caretaker and responsibility, but as two people who finally understood each other.
And in the towering building that quietly connected their lives for decades, a new chapter began.